Reminder, City Hall remains closed during Governor Inslee's Safe Start order, consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic. The public has been invited to attend the meeting virtually by using the Zoom meeting access information that's posted on our website. I'd like to note that, again, that all council members are present. And so we will move on to regular business. The first item that we have is ordinance number 2753, repealing and replacing Sumner Municipal Code 18.37, wireless communication facilities. And who's going to kick this one off?
Mayor, that'll be Mr. Windisch.
Mr. Windisch.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. This is a replacement of our current chapter 1837, which is our wireless communications chapter. And given the complexity and kind of legal technicalities involved in this, we've had our Assistant City Attorney, Christy Palmer, working on this, the bulk of it, honestly, and Daniel Kinney, who's from Ogden Murphy Wallace, an attorney who specializes in wireless communications. So they will be helping me out with this presentation, particularly some of the more technical questions. So the 5G is the fifth generation of wireless service that's being rolled out, and it's rolled out in a little different, in a quite a bit different format than what you've seen in the past. In the past, they used large macro cell, they call it, the large cell towers that cover broad areas of the region for cellular service. The 5G wireless service is on small cell or microcell format, which means instead of having a large cell tower every, I don't know, half mile or mile, you have small cell towers on towers that could be light poles, telephone poles on a range of 500 to 600 feet apart. What that allows for is a lot more concentrated wireless service to the point where we may be eventually hooking up to the internet without even cable from our house to anywhere. We just go straight to wireless. So it allows for a lot more data to be transferred in a concentrated area. It also begins to set things up for things like autonomous vehicles in the future, and the whole Internet of Things, where we're all connected to our phones and our stuff. So it's critical. It's critical infrastructure, and the federal government is taking it very seriously. So the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, has really mandated that cities allow these to occur in their communities, with some allowance for design and aesthetics, which the code addresses, trying to provide as much as possible kind of the stealth technology if there's an ability to hide this equipment. And I'm kind of going over things that I should mention were brought to the council back February 3rd, which I fully can appreciate, feels like another world and another time. But we did sit through a really detailed presentation by Daniel Kinney at that time, trying to get everybody up to speed on kind of what this means. So the ordinance before you is a reinsertion, a rewrite, a replacement of the current chapter because it required so many changes that it was easier to just replace the whole thing. I do want to emphasize that the macro technology, the big cell tower requirements have not changed substantially at all. And the insertion of the small cell permit process, aesthetic and design standards. The FCC also requires, they call it a shot clock. So if you have an existing pole you want to put equipment on, the city's required to approve the permits within 60 days. If it's a new pole, they're required to approve it within 90 days. And those are some pretty tight timelines for any kind of permitting. So, so that's part of the ordinance as well. Couple things I wanted to go over. If I could share my screen, there's some design zones that are designated in the ordinance where we're really being sensitive to these small cells. Basically, they wouldn't be allowed there unless they can demonstrate they have to be allowed there to function. And so I wanted to be able to show where those are at in town. It's our main corridors. I'm trying to share my screen here. Here we go. So can we see, is Google Earth up with, okay, thank you. So what you're looking at here is an air photo on Google Earth of the city, and the east-west is Main Street, really running all the way from West Main Street all the way through, clear over to Sumner Taps, with a couple of diversions. On East Sumner, it drops down 160th, which runs by the YMCA and curves around to 64th Street. So these areas that are in pink here, including 150 feet from the Main and Valley intersection, and 150 feet from the historic Ryan House. And then you can see it goes up and down Friar Avenue and Traffic Avenue, down Thompson, and then even out in front of the old cannery on Cannery Way and over the bridge. These are areas where this technology, the small cell technology, would not be allowed. They would have to demonstrate that there's really no way that things can operate without it being on that main drag, Main Street through town and these other streets. And so the idea there is to protect these corridors that have decorative lighting. They have, our core historic Main Street downtown, our town center plan area to some degree, main entrance into on Thompson. Those areas would basically be protected from, to a large degree, from any of these small cell installations. I want to point out that we've gone through we've used Sumner Connects as a tool for trying to engage the public, get the word out. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on August 20th. We've had the Sumner Connect site up. It's shown the different meetings that we've had over the last several months. Planning Commission held a public hearing on August 20th. We did receive some comments from the industry, as Daniel Kenny describes it, and he can go into the details about their comments. For the large part, they were about the existing large cell tower standards that we have, but he didn't see anything that we needed to respond to in the ordinance. So we had a public hearing on the 20th, with the Planning Commission, they made a recommendation on the 17th. And now we're in front of council for a study session and looking forward to October, put this on council's agenda for action. And just kind of in conclusion, again, the FCC has written things really narrowly that the city has really any purview over. And to the degree that we have been able to, we've put in design standards for these small cell locations, and we're going to do the best we can. It's a technology that needs to happen in order to move to that next step for cellular service and internet capability. So it needs to happen, but we want to do the best we can to protect the aesthetics in our right-of-way. And so that's what the code is intended to address. So with that, happy to answer any questions. And as I said before, a lot of this stuff's pretty technical, and I'll be asking Daniel Kenny to respond as he's able. Thank you.
And if I may briefly, Ryan, follow up on that, you did an excellent job at describing the design zones that are part of this small cell regulation. And so I just wanted to emphasize again that design zones, we do have the ability to, as Ryan said, specify certain areas where we're really concerned about the aesthetics and we want everything to blend really well. And we have a specific look for our corridors in our downtown area. And so the Community Development Department was very careful in selecting the high priority areas we want to protect. And if you make those design zones too large, then essentially they kind of become meaningless, because the 5G provider can say, well, this design zone is so large, there's no alternative area for me to go outside of the design zone. And that pretty much allows them to go, gives them more leeway in the design zone. So I'm not sure, hopefully I'm explaining that in a way that is easy to understand. It's a complex issue, but the community development department did an excellent job trying to really narrow down the really important areas that we want to prioritize for making the 5G providers establish and show that they need to be there for a technological reason, and they didn't have an alternative to go outside of those design zones. And so with that, we'll turn it over to council for questions. And Daniel, Kenny, if there's anything additional you would like to provide at this time, please do so.
You think at this time, Daniel?
No, I apparently have the dream team here with these two because they just checked everything off of my initial list. So thank you so much for that intro. And yeah, I'm here for any questions. And yeah, you really did kind of tick off most of the major things. There was a memo attached in the agenda packet that was prepared for the Planning Commission that goes over some of the legal boundaries that we're kind of working with. If somebody has questions on those, I can go through those, and then the structure of the draft code in terms of the different sections that we have, primarily focusing on the small wireless facilities section, which is Article 4. But I'll just stop talking because we'll open it up for questions and I can dive into anything that people may have.
Okay, we're going to take them in order. We're going to have Councilmember Peterson, then we'll go to Councilmember Reed, then Councilmember Botetto. Go ahead, Melanie.
Thank you. I might have missed it, but was this done in accordance with the suggestions from the Rainier Cable Commission?
I don't recall getting comments from the Rainier Cable Commission.
Okay. They just, interesting, because they've been working on these regulations so that way each jurisdiction can just do a small part and they don't have to start from scratch, but here we are. So, okay.
I know they're doing that with the Comcast franchise, which is
Correct.
Very similar. I have not heard them talk about that. And we've worked with a couple of those jurisdictions from the RCC to work on their code as a firm. So that's, yeah, that's what I would say.
Okay.
Go ahead, Patrick.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a question. Since the design zone encompasses Main Street essentially all the way down, that doesn't create a limit on those businesses being able to access the 5G. It just means that they're going to have to strategically place the small cell towers on either side of Main or in the next block over, basically along the way.
Yes, that's correct. They'll still get the service. It's just won't be right on Main, and you're right. It'll probably be a block off of Main, you know, but still within that 400 to 500, 600 foot range.
Okay, so it likely need towers on either side as it works its way down Main.
Correct.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's what I was just curious about. But it doesn't sound like it's necessarily going to interfere with the business access to those. Because I think some of them will be really looking forward to it.
No, I mean, I'm assuming it has to work, right? So they could even make a case that they need to be on Main in order for it to have the proper service and speed.
And just to clarify, it doesn't regulate, it regulates where the facilities will go. It doesn't regulate who obtains the service. And so it's really up to the service providers to identify the places where they need to locate for their service to work. So if it's up to them to determine how many, small cell facilities they need and where they should go. And that's really the key to the federal rules, is allowing them to have that authority to figure out what they need to do to make their service available to everyone.
And can you guys remind me, are they proprietary towers or are they universal to where multiple providers can use a single tower?
So that's a great question. The technology as of right now, each carrier has a different bandwidth for 5G. And so their radios and their antennas facilitate just that bandwidth and our proprietary technology for how they've set up their network. The poles that these will go on, your standard wooden utility poles, light standards, and things similar to that, in reality right now would accommodate one carrier's antennas and equipment and associated equipment. So I think that should be the expectation. We certainly hope that carriers will learn over time to make their equipment smaller so that they can share poles, or create technology where they can share the antennas or the radios or things like that. But as of right now, if you ask industry that, they would say they cannot put more than one on one pole.
So so in the case of competition, how does that get settled? If there's a competing desire to locate on the same poles in the same areas, is that going to be litigated, or is that the city deciding, or they just stack up the pole?
Again, great question. So there's different layers to these different approvals. The layer that you're touching on right now would likely handle that, and that is the pole owner approval. And so that's a separate agreement. So if the city owns poles, they could lease those poles to T-Mobile or AT&T or somebody. There's also poles owned by other entities. And so those agreements would, again, likely be a master agreement saying, we'll rent you poles, this is how you will install, and then they'd come in for individual site-specific, addenda to that agreement. And so, sure, there certainly could be a run to those pole owners because of, a need in a certain area. If there aren't any more poles that are existing in the right of way, there may be a need to add a new pole in that area. As of right now, the initial rollout that almost across the board that we're seeing is very specific to the carrier. There are carriers that need certain things in certain areas where other carriers don't. That's not going to be universally applicable, because there could be some place like a transit center or something like that where they just really want to get high speeds, or a stadium or whatever. But at least in the kind of the first rollout, if you will, it's going to be going individual places where they need it. As it becomes more and more, everywhere, then certainly there may be a situation where somebody wants to get in and the existing poles have already been taken up, and then they'd have to explore new poles.
Okay, so when when it does reach a saturation level, they're going to have to negotiate putting up additional poles or standalones just specifically for the tower.
Correct.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Barb?
Yeah, I had a similar question about the design zone, especially on Thompson. And, I think you answered the question as far as Main Street and Thompson would be similar. But why do you choose Thompson? Because it is a sort of a main thoroughfare into town?
Yeah. This is Ryan.
Yep.
Yes, we chose it because it's an entrance into the community. You come in from Traffic Avenue interchange, and underneath the railroad, and you've kind of entered Sumner through that avenue. And so it's on the south edge of our town center plan.
Okay.
We felt that was one that should be protected.
But we should be able to get service that would be quality service as far as, the internet and everything. Okay, thank you.
Barb, your concern is that the ability to put poles in such a location that you still get 5G service along Thompson, right?
Yeah, but I would suppose that they would have 5G over at the train station and, the transit center. And then I think everybody in town would want 5G. It's being put in.
Well, if you listen to the TV commercials, it's everywhere right now.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Barb. Go ahead, Charlotte. And then Cindy.
I was gonna say, Mayor, to your point, in every stadium where the service is the worst, but apparently it already exists, yeah. So I kind of have a process question, I think mostly for Ryan. And that is when it actually comes time for these to be placed in town, does the design part of it, like, is there a separate process for that piece? Does that go through design review board, or is that an administrative call, or like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's all administrative. I mean, we don't have time to take it through any kind of a design review commission. And the other thing that's limiting us, they have like solid wooden pole designs versus a hollow pole where you can, there's
Right.
more concealment possible. And then the other real restriction we have is if we have a standard that begins to interfere with what they call their patented technology, then all bets are off. They can say, no, we've got to do this so it's 3 cubic feet, size of a large backpack up on a pole. So you look around at our poles and there's things up there hanging, transformers and whatever that are pretty big. To the degree that we can, we're going to try to, hide wires, hide antennas, reduce the size of things.
I was just curious process wise. Thank you. And then how soon after this happened, how soon are we expecting this to start happening? This might be a Daniel question. Like, is there any sense? Because I mean, Sumner is small. Like, so, I'm assuming they have larger targets first. Like, is there any, or maybe not, I don't know. Like, is there any idea about like how a timeline for when we expect to start seeing these in town?
I can't answer that with certainty. We did have companies that wanted to interact in this process because they cared about your community and the potential to roll out their technology with you. You do have a number of things that I think would draw them to you before other communities, like the train station and transit center. So I think the reality is that it's probably coming sooner rather than later for your community. You're behind, places like Seattle, for example. They're already rolling this out. And there are other communities like Tukwila where there's planned, 60 node. As soon as they get everything ducks in a row, just like this, they're coming in right away. So they say. So I think, the first thing that you're going to see is entities coming in for franchises, which sets the stage for what they want to do. It's that general right of access to the right of way. Then they'll come in probably for an agreement to do pole attachment to city-owned infrastructure. And then they'll do the individual permits under the small wireless permit. But I can't tell you if that's 3 months or 18 months.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Charlotte. Go ahead. I think Cindy, didn't you have your hand raised?
Yes, it did. Daniel, does it mean that the large cell towers will eventually come down and be replaced, or will this ever take over for them?
So the answer to that is no. One would hope that, but it's not. They do work together. If you remember back to not too long ago, 3G and 4G were working together almost in an overlap. That's basically where we are now. 3G is going to phase out and 4G and 5G will work together. And as the mayor noted, there are very broad claims right now that 5G is covering the entire country. I'm a little confused by that myself because industry representatives told me that 5G was all this short bandwidth. It was the small wireless facilities, and that's why we need to do it. But I think what they're getting at is that it's just increased speeds, and it's going to be this hybrid between small wireless facilities and the existing macro towers. And also all the small wireless connect to those macro towers, which then feed stuff around on a broader scale. So they'll stick around for a while.
If you have underground power and don't have the poles, they have to put in tall poles to put in a facility. It isn't just a 5 or 6 foot high thing. It has to go up in the air.
Yeah, it has to go up kind of like your standard wooden utility pole or light standard. It's nothing overly tall, 30 feet, something like that, 35. But yes, they'll have to put something in to get it up to kind of feed out to the people in the cars and the toaster ovens that need technology.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks, Daniel, for the toaster oven comment. Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead, Christie. I think your hand is raised. I don't know whether you.
I just wanted to clarify one thing. In our packet, it indicates that this will come to you October 5th, the small cell design regulations. That actually has been changed. We expect to bring this to you to council for vote on October 19th. And the reason for that is we're also working on a franchise agreement code. As Daniel explained, the franchise agreements kind of set the stage for these wireless facilities. So the telecommunications providers will need a franchise agreement with the city to put their facilities in city right of way. So on October 19th, that's going to the Public Works Committee soon. And so on October 19th, you can expect to see these small cell regulations and the franchise agreement regulations that will be presented to council.
Thanks, Christy. Appreciate the clarification. Ryan, just a really quick one. I'm trying to recall the map, but I think wasn't a Cannery Way on it also? Out past the bridge to the city limits. There aren't a lot of alternative public streets in that area. So I take it would be up to the private sector to either make it work on private property, if that was possible, and or come to the city to try to twist their arm to put it on the main drag.
Yeah, that's going to be how it would play out. I was thinking as I was drawing the map, the high school property might be running into some of the same issues because it's such a deep property all the way over to Washington Street. They may be looking at private installation there.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. Go ahead, Charlotte.
So follow up, I had the same thought as you. Follow up to your question. So to be clear, does that mean that in spite of our mapping, private businesses along that route would still be able to have a pole on their property?
Yeah, that can be individually negotiated.
Thank you.
But they would still have to show that they cannot make it work outside the design zone first. They would still be subject to that requirement.
Are there standards like capacity? Like how do they show that they can't make it work outside that one? I'm just thinking about large community events at the cannery. And where are the nearby opportunities? Like, I don't know what the standard is for quote unquote, for proving it can't work.
Daniel, is that something you are prepared to speak to?
Yeah, so I think what I would point to is in .270 of the draft code. It talks about whether new poles or installations in a design zone would be allowed. And I'll just read number 1. It's whether that facility cannot be located on an existing utility pole or light pole, transmission tower, or site outside of the public right of way, such as a public park, property building, transmission tower, or on a non-residential use in residential zone. And so it's basically saying, and I now have to flip back to the design zone. So the design zones as listed, you would then say, you can't go on this street, but are any of the listed items that I just read available to you next to or near the design zone? So for example, a parking lot for a Safeway next to the street, which is a design zone, would be fine. They have light standards in that parking lot, for their parking lighting that they could go on top of and feed that zone as well. They could also go on top of a building right next to the street. What we're trying to do with the design zones is keep, and that's why choosing a design zone that's like a street is so useful, is to keep that right of way clean and aesthetically pleasing for your population, so that when you come up and down those roads, you enter town, you're shopping or whatever, you don't have a whole lot of stuff hanging above you in the right of way. A lot of times those areas have narrow rights of way, so the buildings are right next to the sidewalk, which is right next to the road. You don't have separations where there are poles that can have boxes on the ground or up in the air. So the goal would be to protect those areas.
Thank you. Now I think follow-up question for Ryan is, how was our zone decided?
The design zones were recommended by our planning staff.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other hands raised. I would suggest that if you have any questions in the meantime, from now until, I believe, what, the 20th? Isn't that when it's coming before council? Is it sooner rather than later? You know, get a hold of staff if you have any questions and try to get some, you know, clarifications on those. It certainly is a challenging topic and one that ought to be interesting to go through given the timeframes that are involved in the process and mandated by the federal government. So it ought to be interesting. I picture one on top of the building where there's this pizza joint right off of Main Street. It'll be, you know, right on top of somebody's apartment there. That's where we're going to have one of those towers. Come on, smile, Charlotte. Anyway.
No, I always expected one there, to be fair.
Yeah. Yeah.
But since you brought me up, Ryan, could you tell us where we can see it, where we can find the design map again?
I will have to print it and I can post it. I can post it on Sumner Connects and email out a link to it.
Email a PDF, that'd be great.
Why don't you, yeah, just email out a PDF to the council.
Sure, I can do that.
Yeah, otherwise I have to go find it.
No, I'll just print it off of Google Earth and send it out to council for sure.
Good.
Mr. Mayor, just ask your toaster.
Yeah, Patrick, it might answer. Anyway, that's why we always unplug it because I don't trust the toaster. Anyway, any other questions any council member has? Present time seeing none. Okay. Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you for your assistance along the way and trying to provide clarity to something that is pretty murky and very interesting. So really appreciate that. And also Christy, thanks for you tag teaming with him and helping Ryan.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Now we'll move on to the next topic, which is ordinance number 2754, budget amendment for parks property acquisition. Okay, Jason, who do I turn that over to? Is that Jason, since he's unmuted himself?
Ms. Raymond.
Okay. Cassandra.
Good evening, everyone. So before you is a budget amendment to the 2020 budget. This is ordinance 2754. The purpose for this budget amendment is the Community Development Department has been working with Pierce County for quite some time now to obtain a conservation futures grant for the acquisition of property. We've been notified that that funding is available with an anticipated and ideal close in 2020. So we need to appropriate those funds. The purchase and sale agreement is for $800,000. $556,500 will be actually funded through the grant, with the remaining $243,500 funded by Parks Impact Funds. So the budget amendment will appropriate the expenditure of $800,000 and fund it by a combination of revenues from Parks Impact Funds and grant funding. And happy to answer any questions. We're bringing this forth to study session for timing purposes. We didn't want to wait for a specific committee meeting. So therefore we're bringing it to the full council at this time.
And Mayor, if I could just add one thing, Mr. Berry will be covering the exact property and going over specifics about that on the next agenda item. And just to add into what Ms. Raymond said about timing, these are funds that have to be expended from the county by the end of the year. That's why we didn't run it through the normal process.
Yeah, thank you very much. As I recall, and this might be Mr. Berry giving me the answer, but the $556,500 from the Conservation Futures, grant originally was a lower priority, and I think wasn't this the one that actually the county council moved ahead in their contingency pot of money to fund because the other items were much larger, and this was a feasible project. Is this the same project we're talking about?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Good. Okay. Okay, so we're going to get a little bit more clarity in the next agenda item, but any question, at least on the funding sources involved in this, park impact fees and Pierce County conservation fees? Any questions from the council on those funding part of it? Okay, seeing none, now we'll move into the actual property acquisition, which is labeled down here as East Valley Highway. We already have that, Derek, East Valley Highway, so I assume we're probably talking about something else.
Correct. I can share my screen if you guys would like to go over it. I can just talk to you about it. Okay.
Go ahead and share your screen, Derek.
So here is the agenda item for the property acquisition. This was taken last week to the Community Development Committee meeting. It was given a recommendation for due pass at that time. So as the mayor was saying earlier, this is the property that we didn't rank really highly on their list. We were going to be contingent and most likely funded in 2021. There are quite a few complex projects ahead of us that had federal funding, and with COVID, those were no longer really feasible to move forward in 2020. I believe it was back in May, Pierce County reached out to us to see if we could move forward in time to get this done by the end of 2020. That started the process. We reached out to TRI Right of Way to do an appraisal and start negotiations. We got our appraisal. Pierce County had a review appraisal performed. That's where we came up with the $795,000 for our offer. 5,000 more of, it would have been 800,000, but 5,000 was for the removal of the building. The property owner negotiated to move it back up to 800,000, and we accepted that offer. It was pretty reasonable. So this is moving forward. We already have a due pass recommendation, but I wanted to share this with council along with the budget amendment and the process that you'll be seeing shortly. Once the purchase and sale is signed, which we're hoping for October 5th to get that approval, we would work with the county, who would then start their documents for a funding agreement, which is kind of our grant acceptance process. So you'll be seeing that actually after we sign the PSA, according to Pierce County's rules on how they do this. So I look forward to moving forward on this. Do you guys have any questions about it?
Derek, just to make sure, are there any questions to council which property we're talking about? I mean, we did cover it before, but it's been a while. And I don't know if it's possible to pull up anything so that council could see, oh yeah, it's that piece of property.
Sure. Is that showing for you guys? I just pulled up Google Earth.
No, we're looking at your agenda.
Okay. Let me go back in this way. So it's the old radio tower property owned by Gloria and Christopher Bennett. The radio tower used to be back here in the middle of the building, or the middle of the property. There's an old tiny little building right here that was the radio station. And the towers were moved a number of years back because of interference with the neighborhood. So as you can see, this is a pretty prime spot for a park in a neighborhood that has nothing. So
the neighborhood is, I mean,
Salmon Creek and Ridgeview Estates, I believe. And then you've got the trailer park down here. And you even have some of the development down here that doesn't have a park. Siebenthaler would be the closest, but not really that accessible.
But it's really adjacent to East Valley Highway and where Puyallup Street comes in, that signalized intersection. Just north of that is would be the entrance into the park area.
Yep. And it's roughly just barely under 4 acres. So it'll be larger than Rainier View Park. So a pretty good addition to our park system.
Okay, questions, comments from council members? Go ahead, Barb.
So I see that it's already been signed by the sellers. Does that obligate the city to buy it no matter what we decide?
No, no obligation.
Okay. But I think it sounds like a fair price to me, so I'm glad it's moving forward.
Okay, go ahead, Kathy, and then we'll go to Cindy. You're unmute yourself, Kathy.
There we go. I just want to say this is awesome. It's in a good spot. There's a lot of people around it. I think it would be perfect. So I'm good on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Go ahead, Cindy.
Could you tell me where the entrance into the park would be again? Because I see rows of houses on almost all directions. So I was wondering how people would enter the park.
No problem. So this property was actually slated for development. A few developers have reached out to the property owner. They were trying to put a bunch of homes in here. So this road right here is the entrance is right here. The building's right here. There's been a truck parked here for years. So they already have a driveway approach. It's wide enough for a full street frontage improvement for that developer, which would mean sidewalks, street trees, full road. So we would have a full access road here. It's 60 feet.
Okay. Okay, good. All right. Thank you.
Go ahead, Charlotte.
Thank you. I first wanted to thank staff for jumping on the opportunity because like for years I've heard about in terms of like equity in neighborhoods, especially like where schools are placed, that they felt like there were more resources, public resources near Maple Lawn and not in Daffodil area wasn't given the same attention. So in terms of neighborhood equity, I'm so glad that we're adding a park up to the northern end. But in terms of accessibility, I don't know what the options are because of the row of houses, but I was wondering about walkable access. Like is there ever going to be a chance to do it that doesn't require kids walking on East Valley Highway, like a busy neighborhood? Like, will the other side, like right now, it looks like there'd be easy access, but will everyone to the east actually be able to access it without driving all the way around?
That's a good question. Right now, this would be the only access. Pedestrian access, like you've mentioned, is something we've been looking at. We continue to look at. There's a potential for maybe just a pedestrian walkway with an easement. But I don't want to get into too much of that because you start looking at parcels and real estate purchasing.
Understood. I would strongly suggest that as it moves forward, like otherwise, like to make sure that it's not a token gesture park and that the neighborhood we're serving can actually reach it. And that it's safely for kids.
Yes, and that is something that Pierce County Conservation Features mentioned as well in our scoring, that they would like to see it as well. And we would absolutely love to have more access on the east or north.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other council members, questions or comments? Okay. Seeing none, I take it this is on our next regular agenda. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Cool. Nice work. Nice working with the county. Appreciate their gestures, the county council actually making that happen, making the funds available, and appreciate you working with staff to get through the process as fast as you have after, reaching agreement with the property owner. So it'd be great progress, and appreciate your work.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, seeing no further discussion on that one. Now go into the 2021-2022 preliminary biennial budget review. And do we turn it over to Cassandra on this one? Okay, Cassandra. And I might note that Cassandra also sent out this PowerPoint presentation to I believe, to all of the council beforehand. So you
Yes.
have it in your in basket somewhere.
Thank you. So tonight we will be taking a look at sidewalks. This is Fund 302. It's a capital program, as well as parks and trails, both the operating portion in the general fund, as well as Fund 310, the capital. Streets, again, the operating portion in the general fund and the capital in Fund 320. And then facilities, both the operating and the capital, which is Fund 325. We've got representatives from each department here to talk about their specific programs. We always start off when we're looking at developing our budget with what our mission is: provide needed and valued services that promote our sense of community. And then, of course, as the budget is being developed, what we try and do is tie really our operating plan and our work plan back to council's strategic priorities: the safe and efficient transportation system, protection of our water, open spaces, and natural resources, the long-range financial stability to provide a balance of city service, and enhancement of community character. With that, I am going to start turning it over to our departments to review their programs. First up is sidewalks. This is Fund 302 and begins on page 150 in your budget document.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. Mike Down, Public Works Director. We're going over the sidewalk portion, and also on meeting tonight is Associate City Engineer Andrew Leach. He's a subject matter expert, so he can help with any questions you might have. The goals for the sidewalk program is to seek funding to construct new sidewalks where there's gaps, and also replace deteriorating sidewalks. We continue to do a 50% match for our voluntary sidewalk program. We continue to identify and construct ADA access improvements throughout the city with the ADA funds and also with the Sound Transit program. Goal is to complete the design of the SR 410 River Grove pedestrian bridge project. And then we're also want to implement policy for sidewalk repair and replacement. Next slide. The budget highlights include $3.6 million in grant funding. Also includes $240,000 transfer from the general fund for the voluntary sidewalks and the ADA program, improvement program. And underfunded is funding to repair damaged sidewalks caused by city assets such as trees. The ADA improvement program, we budgeted $40,000 per year. And the voluntary sidewalk program is $160,000 per year. $80,000 will be the match from the residents and $80,000 from the city. We still have $1.7 million remaining in the Sound Transit pedestrian upgrade. And we plan on doing those improvements in 2021. Also with the Sound Transit grants that we received $450,000 to install lighting to help people that are going to and from the sounder station. Another highlight is the 160th Avenue Sidewalk Retrofit Project, where we're building the sidewalk from Main Street to the YMCA. We have $262,000 in ecology grant funding and $200,000 in the Complete Streets funds. Another project we have is the River Grove Pedestrian Bridge Project, which will connect the River Grove area with the main part of Sumner. We have $473,000 for design and run right-of-way. 372 of that is from Sound Transit funds for design. And then we'll be matching that with $50,000 from city funds for design and right-of-way. We also need to make a change in the preliminary budget We also have to add a 51,000 from the Parks and Trails impact fee to cover the grant local match share. That's completes the sidewalk portion. Can I answer any questions?
Council members, any questions? Cindy, your hand's waved, I think.
Yes.
Barb,
Thank you, Mr. Dahlem. I'm wondering on the lighting and sound transit lighting. Have you considered from Wood down along where it would be in front of the new high school, that where that's all the older style lighting? Is that in your view to be improved?
No, if we could go back a couple slides. The one that shows the sound transit. What next one? That's the area that is in the sound transit. And the main area is just around the station is where we want to get lit. So through the neighborhoods, we're looking at doing decorative lighting on Thompson and Alder and possibly down Park Street. But we won't be doing any of the improvements on Wood.
Okay, so it's just too far out of the perimeter they gave you for that?
Yeah, yep.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you.
I'm trying to look at that map, and it looks like you're actually bordering Wood at the lower right-hand part of it, but it is right on the edge.
Mayor, if I may
Yes.
interject here.
Yeah, please.
Two things to remember, council. As Mr. Dahlem stated, these lights have to be installed in this geographic area, but there are other projects which will likely affect the lighting that Councilmember Hochstetter is talking about. Because if I understand you right, Councilmember Hochstetter, you're talking about the lights on Main Street from Wood going east towards Valley Avenue.
Right.
And Mr. Dahlem, if you can remind me, but I believe that's covered in the school district's redevelopment plans for the high school, is replacing or upgrading some of those lights.
Yeah, they'll be responsible to upgrade the lights around the where they're redoing the high school.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I was wondering on the pedestrian bridge, where does it connect on the north side of 410?
Sumner Avenue.
Yeah,
Sumner Avenue.
thank you.
So they'll improve Sumner Avenue from, like, what is it that goes in front of the middle school? Because that area on the south side of, I can't remember the name of the street, but anyway, those roads aren't very wide, so that you'll be making them wider.
We'll look at that. Right now, we're looking at just getting the design started. We did provide, the school district provided money and we installed sidewalks on the east side of Sumner. So we do have sidewalks there. We'll have to look at that connection because one of the positive things about this is it's much safer for the kids that walk to school from the River Grove neighborhood. So they'll be able to go across that bridge, not have to cross 162 to get to school.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, any other council member have any questions of Mr. Dahlem on the sidewalks before we move on to the next area? Okay, seeing none. Parks and Trails.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is Derek Berry, Community Services Manager. So for our Parks and Trails goals this year, we're looking at the reservation system. It's something that's been discussed for several years. And we have people who will sit out at a park for 4, 5, 6 hours to reserve a spot for a 2-hour birthday party or a celebration. So to better serve the community, we're going to start looking at a reservation system, as well as looking at the working hours of the Parks Department. That'll probably take a year or two to look into labor things as well as what's really needed and working with the community on that. Another goal of ours is to reach out to the community more about our tree care and maintenance. It's something you'll be seeing here in the next couple months, our street tree code being reworked and updated, and kind of some recommendations by staff and seeing how council feels about the maintenance of it. And then once we've concluded that, we'll start reaching out to the public with the updates. We also have some trail maintenance that needs to be addressed, and so we'll be working with Public Works to establish a maintenance rehabilitation plan. Next slide. So some highlights for us as well is the 72-inch mower. It's the big orange one on the right. It's a front load deck that we'll be using out along the trails. We currently are using one of those little green John Deere tractors. It's more of like a residential one. We've burned through a couple decks already. So we'll be thrilled to have this bigger, higher horsepower mower for our trail system. We also are looking to get in the little yellow one there. We call it a trim area mower. This will be a lot more efficient, higher horsepower. In fact, if you look at all the landscaping crews out there, they're using those as opposed to the stuff that we're sitting on. Then we are going to get one more John Deere tractor down here to do some of the bigger areas in some of our parks as well. Next slide. So goals for our capital portion of our trails is to, parks and trails, is to complete a comprehensive plan for the Siebenthaler Park. You might remember a year or two ago, I think it was about 2 years ago, we bought the 2 parcels on the west side of Siebenthaler that were slated for development. Nothing's been done with them since. Siebenthaler Park is an area that needs some attention, and we're looking at doing a case study, well, beyond the case study, an actual comprehensive plan. What that'll do is allow us to have a good comp plan in place with real-time actual pricing so we can go get grants, hopefully. Another big one would be our completing the Rainier View Park covered court. We've been at this for a couple of years and we're still waiting to hear back from RCO on this latest go round. Next slide. So the capital portion of the Parks and Trails for budget highlights, we have $687,000 anticipated in grant funding. That includes $100,000 for the Fire Avenue Trail, $350,000 for the Rainier View covered court, and $237,500 from LCP, which is through the state legislature. We're looking at $120,000 transferring from general fund for playground replacement program. That's something that you funded last biennium, and it helped actually pay for Loyalty Park's playground. We have $430,000 earmarked to use for the parks impact fees. Of that, $380,000 would go to Rainier View covered court, and then $50,000 total would go towards Siebenthaler. One thing that is unfunded would be a comprehensive plan for our new park that we are looking at buying that property, the Bennett property or the radio tower property. So that's one thing that is unfunded at this time. Next slide. Oh, I guess that's it for me, actually. I'm sorry. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, Derek, I thought you were just going to cruise right on through into the streets and take care of
What I do.
Yeah, go ahead, Bart.
So when is the Loyalty Park playground going to open?
Look into the mirror ball, crystal ball. I'm not too sure. So we have a couple weeks left with some groundwork. When we had the curbing put out there, we had to remove some of the dirt. The curbing looks great. I don't know if you guys have noticed, the port in place is done. That is now cured. So we have been doing some dirt work this last week, the end of it. They seeded last Friday and they seeded again today. We're hoping to get some good germination this week, and then probably another week or two at least of it to thicken up before we let kids go run on it and it becomes a soupy mess. So hopefully early November. Unfortunately, yeah, it's been delayed left and right and all over the place this whole COVID time.
Okay, but at least it's on the schedule to open. Thanks.
Yes, definitely. Lights at the end of the tunnel. We're getting there.
Yeah, people will get frustrated, I know, in this one because they'll see everything done, and it's hard to understand, you know, the seating and the germination and all that. All they see is the beautiful accessible play set and will want to get on it. So, but I certainly understand the delay. Ryan?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to point out the comprehensive plan efforts for these parks is so important to lay that groundwork for future funding for, what you plan, right? So once we have a plan, then we can go after more funding to actually implement the plan. And yeah, it's just important first steps.
Thanks, Ryan. Go ahead, Charlotte.
So back to Barb's comments about Loyalty Park. I ran by there a few days ago. Derek, so far it's looking really good. I'm still hoping for a dog park directly behind Bertie Enslow's property. I'll be there for that opening so fast. But going to budget though, I wonder about the equipment piece of it. I'm assuming like, do we think the larger size will help maximize like staff time and whatnot? Is that going to cut back on how long it takes?
The mowers and such? Absolutely, yes. Yeah, it is something that right now, Tom out along the trails, it's painful to watch him. He's bouncing around all over the molehills. We have the deck raised as high as you can. The new front loading one, the big orange one, I like to call it, it's 72 inches, higher horsepower. And the fact that it's the front deck, we can get up under the brush as opposed to him nailing the lower branches of some of the trees along the trail. Everyone's been hiking through the woods. When you get whacked in the face with a branch, it's not fun. So it's way more maneuverable. The little yellow one, the trim area one, way faster, way better to use than our John Deere sit on top ones. So the John Deere sit on top ones, the garden tractors, those still have a really good use out in the parks, but not necessarily in the planter strip areas, places like City Hall where it's not a bigger field. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for raising that, Charlotte. I mean, it's an important part. I think over the years, staff has been trying to increase the quality and the nature of the equipment to, make it easier and more efficient for staff, realizing that's our most important asset, and you got to give them the right tools to do the job. And this is part of that continuing effort.
Yeah, in fact, Jerry's mower has 1,100 hours on it, which is really high. So it's definitely time to replace some of this equipment.
Okay. Any other questions anybody has of Derek? Okay. Derek, I don't see any questions. Darn. Okay.
I'll see you in a few.
Okay. Let's move on. Move on to streets. Mr. Dahlin, would that be you again?
That would be me again. And I also have a subject matter expert, Michael Koza, online, so he could help answer any questions you may have. For our goals for the streets, execute the chip seal and plastic pavement markings, the thermoplastic elements of the pavement preservation program, establish a new crack seal element of the pavement preservation program, and we complete pavement repairs as needed. Highlights, capital costs for the general fund share of the four-wheel drive brush mower that Derek was talking about, and we talked about in the utilities, a roller to compact asphalt, and a tack coat machine. Studies for future project planning and traffic calming funding. Underfunded is funding to improve pavement preservation. I'll show you our cycles in a minute. And then unfunded is a pavement overlay program. Next slide. I just want to show this.
Mike, just a second. Charlotte, go ahead.
Thank you. That's easier for me than trying to remember what was on the first slide after we get through all of it. So Mike, what's the amount for the traffic calming measures? And can you give us an example or a couple of examples of what traffic calming measures? I mean, I think I have an idea of what they would entail and how much like each effort what's the price range? Like, so how many traffic calming measures are we talking about?
Well, we're budgeting for it. We're budgeting 50,000 a year for traffic calming. We don't have any particular ones that we're looking at, but some of the examples, one of the things I don't care to do is speed bumps or humps or traffic calming. Right now, we're putting in bulb outs on Main Street by the high school.
Right, okay, yeah.
So that's a traffic calming. We can also look at other, the toolbox for traffic calming. But basically we have some money that we can explore and identify areas where we want to implement traffic calming.
And can I ask what your hesitation is about speed bumps? Is it cost or is it something else?
We try to build good roads that you can drive on, and putting obstacles in the middle of the road is not something I'm a fan of. We could just let our preservation go down and have potholes, and it would have the same effect as speed bumps. So I'm not a big fan of putting obstacles in there, and also if you have emergency services trying to get there and going over speed bumps, I don't think I'd want to ride in the back of an ambulance when they're trying to give me an IV and they go over a speed bump.
What does a speed bump cost?
It all depends on what you put in. The ones we did over on 74th are kind of a temporary plastic speed bump, and they're probably about 4,000 what we did in that area. Speed humps are quite a bit more. It takes asphalt. You need to put asphalt down. It takes a lot of painting and signage and all that good stuff.
Okay, and then what about the ones on Main Street? I don't remember what you called them, but the new mechanisms on Main Street.
The bulb outs.
Okay, bulb outs?
Bulb.
Oh, bulb. Okay, bulb outs. Okay.
Bulb outs.
What's the rough cost of those?
You want to, Michael's
Sure.
been doing the temporary ones, so he has a good cost for it. Permanent ones are quite a bit more. You want to answer that, Michael?
Sure. So we're looking for the ones on Main Street between $30,000 and $50,000. The nice thing about that,
Or each?
total.
Okay.
There's 4 intersections that we're doing. We've only put a couple of them out so far. Crews have been delayed due to the fire cleanup and the wind, the windstorm cleanup. They were looking to do that closer to the beginning of September, but yeah, things just kind of went crazy. But our crews are actually doing the install, the curbs we purchased, and we're going to be filling them and topping them with asphalt. But yeah, the total for those was probably in the $40,000 to $50,000 range. We're fortunate to be able to use some grant money for that. So that didn't come out of the pot, but it could have easily come out of these budgeted funds. So that's, generally the range there. We did one thing Mike mentioned was this budget is $50,000. It's $50,000 for the biennium. So $25,000 per year for traffic calming.
Great, got it. Okay, thank you both.
Yep.
Okay, go ahead, Mike. Street
All
operator.
right. The next slide I have up here is pavement performance versus maintenance, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. And what this illustrates is when you have a new road, it's in excellent shape. They did a good job. And we have a PCI, pavement condition index, give it 100. And then as time goes on and it starts to wear, it's starting to deteriorate. And you can see by this chart here that about year 8 or year 10, you want to start doing some preventative maintenance. If you start doing some preventative maintenance at that point, you're spending $1 to do your preventive maintenance. If you let it go too far down the line, then you're into overlays or rebuilds of the roads. And then it costs, you know, $6 to $10 as compared to $1 if you do it at year 8 to year 10. So by doing the preventive maintenance, you're basically extending the life of the road. So we're getting better. I guess we'll keep moving on. We're doing better at doing the chip seal, the crack seal, and keeping the roads sealed that way so we don't get water into the sub base and so we don't get as many failures. Next slide. So in our preservation program, we have $125,000 in the crack seal. And we're about on a 7-year cycle. So we're right on the right cycle for doing that. The chip seals for our local and collector streets, we've budgeted $244,000 per biennium, and we're about on a 15-year cycle. So it would be nice to shorten that cycle a little bit so we can make that 8 to 10-year cycle. The other thing is we don't really have overlay for our overlay program for our arterials. If we let it go too long without starting some overlay, then it'll end up being a reconstruction, which is considerably more. We'll bring to the council in some future time what that overlay program should really look like. Next slide. As part of the street operations, we pay our share again for the brush mower, the roller, and the tack coat machine. The transportation studies that I talked about that we funded, one is to study intelligent transportation systems. So that's linking your signals. Some places can time their signals, so when you roll up, it turns green for you. That's what one of the things the past mayor always wanted to have. But also there's other advantages to it. So you can actually control your signals from a central location. So we want to do a study to see if that's something feasible for the city of Sumner. We also budgeted $20,000 for the comprehensive plan update that the planning department is doing. And that's for the transportation element of that comprehensive plan update. And another study we'll be doing next year is 142nd Avenue signals study. We've had quite a bit of growth in the North End. A lot of people think that there should be signals here, there, and elsewhere. So we need to do a study to see if those signals are warranted, especially on 29th, where we're going to build our operations facility, and also Tacoma and Puyallup Avenue. That's getting busy in the afternoons. We've got to look and see if that's signal is warranted there. Next slide. Streets capital, our goals is to design and property acquisition for Main and Wood intersection, and then seek construction funding. Design and property acquisition for Stewart Road Bridge. And then also those that funded, we also are seeking construction funding. And design of 166th widening project. We have design money. We need funding for property acquisition and construction. Also highlights are construct the Academy Street bike lanes. We continue to use the portion of the property tax to leverage grant funding. With the grants, we need a local share, and we've been using the property tax to meet that share. And then we also appropriated some funds for the WashDOT Gateway project that we committed to. Next slide. Again, going back to the Wood and Main intersection improvements, we are funded for design and property acquisition, and you can see the rendering to the right of what we hope that to look like. Unfunded is the construction. We need about $1.5 million to complete the construction on that project. Another project is the Stewart Road Bridge. You can see The area in the blue to left of your screen is Pacific's project to widen the Stewart Road over the railroad tracks. They are totally funded and they should be going out to construction next spring. And then the only section that's left is the widening of the bridge. We want to put 4 lanes on the bridge with a multi-use path on the north side and sidewalks on the south, so it's a little safer to cross that bridge. We are funded in design and property acquisition for the Stewart Road Bridge. We received $765,000 in federal funding, and we used $1.7 million in our traffic impact fees. Unfunded is the construction of that project. Total construction costs are about $25 million. We have about $8 million in grants, and so we're still $17 million short to fund the construction of that bridge.
Mr. Dahl,
Next project.
Go ahead, Charlotte.
Thank you. Sorry. Is Stewart Road Bridge all on us? Do we have regional partners in that?
That's a really good question. Originally, we had a partner in Pierce County. They are waffling at the pre-annexation agreement that we signed with them. We are working really hard right now to get that clarified with the county. So we hope to keep them as partners for this project. Auburn has put in a little bit of money for this project. All the traffic impact fees that they collect at Lakeland Hills will be going towards this project. And then
Okay.
we have, go ahead.
No, sir. I was going to ask, do we have traffic counts that could hopefully compel some of these regional, like it sounds like Auburn is there, like they understand it with the Lakeland Hills contribution, but there's also like the Lake Taps, like Pierce County. Do we have traffic counts at all that show what should be proportional contribution?
Yeah, we have traffic counts that show what it should be. But typically, you can't make jurisdictions pay to redo an infrastructure in your city because there's most traffic to it. It's the jurisdiction that has the asset that needs to be replaced that usually pays for it. So yeah, we can show them what kind of traffic they're generating to this project, but there's no real way to make them pay that proportionate share.
I have ideas.
Yeah, Charlotte, I've had conversations with the county executive, on this topic, and have told him that they need to step up to the plate in terms of the pre-annexation agreement, which they say is clouded because it wasn't passed by the county council. That's the county council's problem, not ours. In principle, they gave us that roadway with that pre-annexation agreement. So there are some, some drastic steps that you could take. In other words, give it back to the county if they're not willing to live up to an agreement. The county executive is I think we finally got his attention, and he's looking at it and wanting to work with the county council to look at alternative sources of money that could be used for the project. And that conversation happened probably just about a week ago with him. Keep on pushing and pushing. I think they're finally there wanting to work with us, and we'll see what comes out over the next 3 weeks.
Okay, thank you for working on that. Out of curiosity, what roughly is the ratio for sources of traffic?
I think when it's all done and said, Michael can correct me, I think we contribute about 7 to 10% of the traffic in that corridor. Lakeland Hills is like 23%, and Pierce County, I think, is about 25%.
Thank you.
I might mention we do have a rather large warehouse distribution, project that is located north of Stewart Road within the city that also uses, the project. So it isn't just sometimes a matter of the traffic count, but the nature of the traffic too. Anyway.
I will say that the majority of the traffic is during the PM peak hour when we have issues. And majority of the traffic at that time is residential commuter types, rather than, while we do have warehousing that is developing and going in, they try to avoid those times because of the trouble with congestion.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, they go to a parking lot on 167. Okay. Any other questions, Mike, on this one before he moves on? Cindy, go ahead.
Mr. Dahlem, I wanted to go back just a little bit to the Main and Wood intersection. Our picture is kind of small, but is that a final design or just one of the designs in the mix?
That's our chosen design there. It's a concept, so there'll be some tweaking. We've reached out to the property owners that are affected on this, and I think they're fairly comfortable. We've gotten some feedback from them, made a couple of tweaks to the design already based on their input. But that's what we're moving into final design on.
Well, because what my question is on that, the way I've got it figured out, if you pull into one of those parking spots at the angle that it is, when you need to back out, you're going to have to back out over a lane of traffic to get yourself going again.
Well, those are back in parking stalls.
Yeah, you're going the wrong way, Cindy. If you're,
Okay,
yeah, if you're
so
backing
everyone
out,
will
you're-
know
you're
you
getting
have to
messed up.
back in.
Yeah,
If-
because of
if
the
I-
angle to the traffic, yeah.
Okay, well then that solves my back out problem I was talking about. So so you have to back in to begin with to make this drawing work out.
Yeah. And,
Okay.
you know, we, especially in front of the bicycle shop, the back end works a lot better because they can back in and load a bike on their car rather than take it around back and work between moving traffic and their car.
Okay, okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Mike. Move ahead to wherever you were going. That one.
So another one of our projects is the 166th widening, and we're in the design phase. So on the right-hand side, you see 64th and the westbound off-ramps. We have this concept here that have been preliminarily approved by WashDOT, so we're moving ahead on that design. So next slide. So the city has funded the design, 800,000 coming out of our traffic impact fees. Still unfunded is about $1.7 million in property acquisition and about $8 million to construct the improvements. Next slide. Academy Street bike lanes. We're just chose a consultant to help us with the design of that. It's fully funded by Sound Transit, 875,000 and 97,000 from the city general fund. And then the Sumner Taps resurfacing. We're in the construction phase of that. Our intention was to actually bid that and do that this year. As always with grant money, federal money, there's a lot of strings that are attached to it. So, you know, you're happy you got grant money, but sometimes it makes a lot more work and a much longer review time. On this one, we're ready to go. We sent all the construction plans to WashDOT and our specifications, and it took them quite a while to review it. According to WashDOT guidelines, the paving season ends in October. We're out to bid with this right now, but we won't be able to make that paving season. So we moved the construction of this to next year. The preliminary budget does not show that, so that's why I have these numbers in red. But basically, it's a 675,000 federal grant, and then 106,000 comes out of the city general fund. Next slide. And then also we talked about the gateway commitment. We committed to 500,000 by 2024. We set aside $100,000 in the 1920 biennium. And in this biennium, we're setting aside another 200,000. And then the next biennium, another 200,000 for that 500,000 in 2024. I think that completes the streets. Could I answer any questions?
Okay, go ahead, Cindy.
Okay, tell me where the gateway is again. I'm a little bit confused. I'm trying to look at this map, but
I could have done a better job of explaining that. The gateway is basically extending 167. So if you get on 167 and you drive into Puyallup, it pretty much ends at Meridian. So there will be some improvements around Meridian, and it'll go all the way into Fife to the Port of Tacoma.
oh,
So
that's
it's
right.
been-
We're partners in that with other cities.
Right. Cindy, they call it Gateway because it starts up at like 509 and comes down, but our relevant piece of it locally is like, might as well call it 167.
Okay, so Mr. Dolan, my other question was on the 166 widening. If you're $17 million short, what kind of ideas do you have for that to be able to complete that?
Oh, I'm full of ideas, or at least full of it, but no, that is, you know, it's pretty much like any project we do in the city. We don't have the funds to complete the project. So we will be applying for grants. We actually applied for a TIB grant for part of this. I think we exceed their general funding at this point, so I don't think we'll get that TIB grant this go around. But a lot of times it's good just to make them aware of the project. And we'll be going after Transportation Improvement Board funds. We'll be going after the federal PSRC funds. And also we'll be lobbying the legislature for money to appropriate towards this project.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, this has been part of our legislative agenda, you know, Cindy, for the last, you know, couple, 3 years, and as part of the overall 410 improvements. And we got Traffic Avenue there, and, you know, now we're moving down the line, and we'll keep on pushing on it. It may take some time. The current COVID thing and with the legislature did not help in terms of funding, but we'll keep on moving it. Okay, any other questions? Any questions of Mr. Dolan, what he presented? Okay.
Thank you.
Move on to facilities.
Hello again, Mayor and Council. This is Derek again, Community Services Manager. So the 21-22 goals for facilities is to provide ongoing maintenance of the facilities, extending their useful life. This includes City Hall, the treatment plant, shops, senior center, the Ryan House. As you can guess, a lot of those need quite a bit of attention. Another goal is to assist in the design of the new operations facility out on 29th, and as well as address unplanned maintenance needs. Next slide. So some budget highlights is currently in our accounting software, we have all of our custodial services included with our facilities. We're separating those out so that we can better track what goes into our custodial needs as well as strictly our facility use. One thing that we are underfunded in is unforeseen facility issues, pretty much the appliances. Daniel does a really good job of making sure everything's running, but sometimes water heaters go out, sometimes appliances go out. He's done a really good job of repairing them, but every once in a while you have to completely replace them. And those aren't typically a thing that we really plan for with particular asks. Next slide. So for some of the capital projects, I'll skip down to the fourth one down here. One thing that Daniel has mentioned is the HVAC system at City Hall. The building's now 20 years old. We have several units for HVAC that are going to be replaced here. So we're planning on replacing 2 per year, probably for the next 4 to 6 years. If one of those goes offline, obviously we repair it right then, but it's something we're planning ahead for. Other things for capital is the design and construction of the Public Works Operations Facility, as well as the environmental cleanup at East Main, and then that's for the future public library. In the meantime, we're also looking at, is there a possible way to do a feasibility study for a food court out there? Another big thing we're looking at is I guess it's not that big, but the council chambers needs to be remodeled. We're looking at some technology improvements as well as some rearrangement and upgrades down there. Next slide. So some budget highlights. We have $175,000 transfer in. 80,000 of that is for the council chambers from building reserve. So we'll be doing some upgrades, like I said, technology wise, that make it a better facility for online meetings. Even when we're allowed to go back in, we're probably still going to have some sort of online meeting platform. We're looking at 15,000 for that food truck court study. And then 40,000 HVAC, that's per year for the 2 units per year. And then 40,000 is listed for the Main Street property demolition I mentioned before. We've got the Public Works Operations.
Derek,
Yeah.
hold on a second. Go ahead, Charlie.
Sorry, as we go through this, it helps for me to know, are these all sourced from general fund?
Yes. So, well, the council chambers would be coming from building reserves. The other 3, so the food court or the food truck court, HVAC, and the Main Street demo are coming from general fund.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And then the Public Works Operations Facility construction funded by existing funds and debt financing. Some unfunded things are the City Hall roof replacement. Daniel says we should be able to get through the next 2 years or so. In the end, if something does happen though, we obviously need to fix it. So we're guessing it'd be about 150 up to 250 if we wanted to go with the solar option. Might even get closer to 300 if we do decide to do solar. Several years ago, we did an investment grade audit and looked at the possibility of having solar panels on the south facing side. At that time, they had recommended we wait until we actually replace the roof and you have it incorporated into your design of the roof and remodel of it. Another thing we're looking at that's unfunded is the senior center improvements. With the current fire, we realized the power in the grid system isn't the best at all the time. And the services the senior center provides with meals right now to the community, we had to stop things like that. So in looking at the senior center, the kind of facility it is, to do a proper generator, we're looking close to $150,000. And then what other improvements could we do at a facility like that? We're looking at maybe 50,000 more on top of it to maybe be like an emergency EOC, like a backup EOC for the city. I believe that's it for the slides.
Derek,
Oh, it is not, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
What's that?
Yeah. Going back to your solar, did you call what the payback was for the solar installation? How many years?
It wasn't amazing. It was, I think they incorporated the cost of the roof into it as well, but it was close to 20 years.
Okay.
And you typically get about 30 years out of the solar panels is what they said. But there are other opportunities out there for public-private partnerships where you can have them pay for the upgrade. They get the green tax write-offs, and then after 5 years, you buy it for $1, stuff like that. It's things we've looked at in other facilities as well. We just never moved forward with it.
Okay. Go ahead, Kathy.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I've had to go into City Hall a couple times. I think they need some cardboard people and some piped in voices and crowd music right now, because it's kind of eerie going into City Hall and nobody's in there. But on the other hand, I think anything with replacing things on City Hall is well worth the money. So I just wanted to say those things. We're good.
Okay. But,
Okay, yeah.
and then Cindy. Barb?
Okay. On the senior center, do you know if they do any delivery of food to people? Like today, I was aware of a lady that's, really having trouble. She only lives maybe 2 or 3 blocks from the senior center, but then, she can't get there because of her age and not able to drive. So do you know if any services like that are being offered? I know this isn't part of the budget, but.
I might not be the best one to answer that, but I wouldn't be surprised if they do it without advertising it. Jeff, do you know otherwise?
Yeah, I can answer that question. I know that there are a few folks that I think that might get meals delivered to them, and that's possibly something that we can look into. It's not an official service that they advertise, but I do think that they would, with all the resources they have, would be able to find a way to help someone out, especially if they're quite close to the facility.
Yeah, it's just over on 164th or whatever. But yeah, so that'd be good. All right, I'll touch base with you later.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, my question, I guess, is for Derek. Are you there, Derek?
Yeah.
He's there.
Okay, because I was just wondering, what would it take to move the senior center improvements up on the list? Because I just feel like an emergency shelter is really a priority item, and an overnight shelter, if you were able to facilitate that. Is there federal grants you can apply to that could help with that type of thing? Or it just became so apparent how we didn't really have any place. We had places that with power out for quite a long time, and people can get cold and all kinds of other things. So I just wondered, did you have any ideas on that?
That's really up to council with policy decision, is what I would say. It's something that if you wanted it moved up and to be discussed, we can look at those alternatives. I'm assuming there's funds out there for grants.
Derek, I can assist with this one as well. These senior center improvements were actually things that were brought up to me by the senior center themselves. We thought that the initial investment of adding a generator would be nice. So, we are able to have the facility have power. We can provide food there. It's the only city facility that has a commercial kitchen in it. So it has a lot of advantages to making sure that building has power in case of an emergency. Adding extra services like a shower facility is kind of what would be in that second $1,000, and that would be part of a more broad conversation if the city wanted to turn that into an emergency shelter or a warming center or a way for people to access it. But we thought at least the first step in the plan would be to making sure that there's power there.
Can I suggest that maybe we discuss that further somewhere along the line and see if we can't help fund a generator?
We can certainly do that.
Sure.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Okay. Any other questions of Derek on the facilities? At least on this one.
Okay, the next item is the operations facility. As you know, we've been in the planning and design phase for a new public works operations facility that will house all of our existing crews that are at our city shops. Plus, it'll bring back our parks employees who are actually operating out of a house on the current property right now, as well as the old golf course, as well as our facility crews that are operating the old SDA office. So it's quite the large project. You may recall over the 19 to 22 biennium, so last biennium and this coming biennium, each utility has contributed a little over $1 million to the design and property acquisition part of this project. What hasn't been met is the general fund contribution for that. So what staff is proposing is that we dedicate $2.1 million from the Red Apple sale, which is a general fund asset, towards this project. It'll go a long way to at least meeting the initial design and property acquisition costs, as well as getting us set up to go out on the bond market when we go to construct this. Yeah, so with that, I'll take any questions on that particular item.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Is the 2.1 million the amount that you want sent to the operations to this streets portion? Or is that the amount of the sale?
No, okay, so the Red Apple was sold for $2.1 million. That money is currently sitting in the general fund, just in fund balance. But what we're proposing is that 2.1 million be allocated to the general fund portion of the operations facility, which is primarily streets, but it also would cover the parks department and facilities departments.
Did that answer your question, Charlotte?
It did, thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
That makes sense to me. I just want to say that makes perfect sense. So that's my input.
Okay, any other questions, comments, statements by council members?
All right, next slide. And I think Cassandra's going to wrap us up with this.
Okay.
Okay. So that concludes what we had scheduled for this evening's review. Our next review will be October 12th. We'll be looking at not only property tax, this will be the levy for tax year 2021, but also the general fund departments that we haven't already talked about in the light of today's meeting and the last meeting. After that, we'll have a public hearing for our property tax levy, as well as a study session on all of the remaining funds. We have 2 public hearings scheduled for our budget, action on our property tax resolution, and right now we are on track to adopt our 21-22 budget at the end of November. So happy to answer any questions. If something comes up after this meeting, feel free to send me an email. I'm happy to reach out to the departments to answer any of those questions. And that'll do it for the budget this evening. Thank you.
Okay, any questions? Go ahead, Jason.
Mayor, I'm sorry, one more question from me. I heard tonight the senior center generator, but is there any other items that council would like us to bring back in the future for possible consideration of your strategic fund or other funding to talk about more? There's a lot of things on this presentation tonight that were either unfunded or underfunded. Okay, if you think of something, please let me know. We just want to be prepared. What you can see, we have a tight timeline.
Yep. No, I agree with you, Jason. There are a lot of things that are listed down as unfunded. And the council has talked about the council designated monies and stuff, but really hasn't talked about how they're to be allocated or if they're to be allocated. So if you have any ideas or thoughts and stuff, feel free to share that with staff. Thank you. Okay. Seeing no hands then, okay. We will move on to the next item. It has to do with diversity and equity update and discussion. And I would turn that back over to you, Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Tonight, we're going to continue our discussion and learning together regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have 2 videos lined up for you today, and then a quick update on what the internal DEI committee has been working on. So with that, I'll share my screen. Apologize.
You might think racism in the US is really a case of a few bad apples. A racist cop here, a so-called Karen there, a leader of a white supremacist group. You know, people who deliberately hate. But we can't blame racism in America on just a few bad apples. Think of our nation's problem as more like an apple pie, with the racial injustice baked right into every aspect of our society. Meet Ebony and Emily, two American babies, one black, one white, born at the same time, same place, but Ebony will not get an equal slice of the pie, and that starts from birth. Because of her race, Ebony is 3 times more likely than Emily to die in the hospital as a newborn if her doctor is white. And once Ebony and Emily go to school, while both girls occasionally misbehave, studies show they won't face the same punishment. Ebony is 7 times more likely than Emily to be suspended and 4 times more likely to be arrested on campus. When the 2 girls grow up and apply for jobs, odds are fewer employers will call Ebony back because she has a black-sounding name. And even though Emily and Ebony will get the same college degree, once Ebony is hired statistically as a black person, she'll make an average of 25% less than Emily. So why didn't Ebony get an equal slice of that apple pie? It's because systemic racism is built into our country's DNA. In the 17th and 18th centuries, wealthy white men needed land, so they took it from indigenous people and then forced blacks into slavery. To justify using blacks for free labor, the whites in power promoted a myth that blacks were inferior. And as Seattle-based author Ijoma Oluo points out, our nation's institutions, politics, and policies were designed against the backdrop of that money-driven lie that black people just weren't as worthy or as capable as whites.
Our school systems were built around this. Our economic systems are built around this. Our government systems were built around this. And it is simply that things were designed to uphold this story, to uphold this exploitation.
And even though slavery ended here more than 150 years ago, the racism that fueled it persists in systemic ways today. White Americans now hold 85% of this country's wealth. Black Americans, just over 4%, and Hispanics, just over 3%. People of color, people like Ebony, are statistically more likely to be impoverished, incarcerated, and face discrimination in healthcare. Emily may have her own barriers in life, but her skin color won't be one of them.
It's not someone said, here's your wealth because you're white. Here's your status because you're white. It simply means that the barriers that we placed in front of people of color were not placed in front of you. Now, you may have a whole nother set of barriers, right? You may have barriers of disability, barriers of class, barriers of immigration status, so many other barriers that were placed in front of you. But acknowledging privilege is simply acknowledging if we also took that other set of barriers that we place in front of people of color, you would stumble even further.
So even though you may not consider yourself a bad apple, a racist cop, a so-called Karen, or a member of an extremist group, Oluo says you may have played a role, even if you have the best intentions.
Instead of this whole, let's all learn to be best friends and love each other, you can love someone of a different race and ethnicity and still actively participate in their oppression based on how you vote, based on what you bring up in your office meetings, based on where you spend your money.
It's not too late to change the recipe of the most American apple pie.
So that first video gave us just a very high-level overview of systemic racism, backed up by some data. The next video is a TED Talk from a guy named Jay Smooth. He does several talks on this topic, and it's going to talk about how do we become more comfortable in talking about racism and addressing each other when we see behaviors that are racist. So let me get this one started.
talk a little bit about race tonight, or to be more precise, I want to talk about how we talk about race, how we engage in race conversations, and how we might get a little bit better at it in some ways. And that's a topic that I have always enjoyed. Most Americans avoid race conversations like the plague, and we often take our ability to avoid it and use it as a measure of our progress and enlightenment, which I think is kind of telling in and of itself. But I've always been drawn to those conversations and fascinated by them, in part because growing up as a very light-skinned black man of mixed descent, I often find myself in sort of peculiar race-based conversations. Oftentimes when I'm meeting someone for the first time, rather than making small talk, they'll immediately present me with a philosophical conundrum. They will ask, "What are you?" And I'll have to explain, I'm not a philosophy major, and my father is black, my mother's white, what are we? I don't know. So I've always had a passion for studying and observing how we communicate about race and how we might get a little better at certain aspects of that communication. And I made a video commentary named How to Tell Someone They Sound Racist, which talks about a particular type of race conversation, which usually doesn't involve any explicit racist intent. There's no blatant racism involved. It usually involves well-intentioned people, but it's a situation where one of us feels a need to tell someone that something they said may have had connotations they weren't aware of, or they may have done something that had a hurtful impact that they might not have been aware of. And that's a conversation we all find ourselves in from time to time. And it's a conversation that usually goes horribly. Because no matter how clear you try to be in conveying that you're not attacking the person, you're just trying to offer a specific critique about something that just happened, when we are receiving that sort of critique, we tend to deeply personalize it and take it as a personal attack, and we tend to respond by saying, "Are you saying that I am racist? How could you say I am a good person? Why would you say that I am a racist?" And you try to explain, "No, I'm talking about the particular thing that you said." "No, I am not a racist." And what started out as a what you said conversation turns into a what you are conversation, or what I am conversation, which is a dead end that produces nothing except mutual frustration. And you never wind up seeing eye to eye or finding any common ground. So in my video, I offered some suggestions for how we might stay focused on the what you said conversation and find some common ground. And that video, most videos on YouTube die off after 48 hours, but this video really struck a chord, which I think shows how hungry many of us are to find better ways to communicate on these issues. And the two types of feedback I get most commonly on that video are, one, I really appreciated the perspective you gave about staying focused on a what you are conversation. And the second type of feedback I get is, I tried the strategies you suggested about staying on the what you are conversation, and they actually never work. And this is true, unfortunately. No matter what angle you take as far as voicing that critique, the vast majority of the time, it's still going to lapse into a defensive what I am conversation. I think framing it as clearly as you can in that what you said form is still valuable because it makes the substance of your beef as clear as possible to other people observing the conversation, especially in public discourse. And it gives both of you the best shot at finding common ground and seeing eye to eye. It's worth going for that 10%, but generally the success rate might be higher here at Hampshire College. But where I live on the internet, the success rate tends to be around 10%. So since I made that video and took in that feedback, I've been thinking about what other approaches we might be able to take. And I think since we can never entirely fix that conversation by changing how we voice the critique, I think we might be able to also make it budge a little bit by considering how we receive that critique and how we might be able to take a suggestion that we may have said or done something racist and take it in stride and not completely freak out and assume that the world thinks that I'm a bad person. So the first thing that makes it difficult to accept that critique, that you may have said something racist, is simply that it involves the possibility that you made a mistake. And none of us takes that too well. None of us enjoys that. But in most other situations, when the possibility arises that we made a mistake, we are usually able to take a few deep breaths and tell ourselves, I'm only human. Everyone makes mistakes. But when it comes to conversations involving race and prejudice, for some reason, we tend to make the opposite assumption. We deal with race and prejudice with this all or nothing, good person, bad person binary, in which either you are racist or you are not racist. And if you're not batting 1,000, then you're striking out every time. And this puts us in a situation where we're striving to meet an impossible standard. And if anything less than perfection means that you are a racist, that means any suggestion that you've made a mistake, any suggestion that you've been less than perfect is a suggestion that you're a bad person. So we become averse to any suggestion that we should consider our thoughts and actions. And it makes it harder for us to work on our imperfections. When you believe that you must be perfect in order to be good, it makes you averse to recognizing your own inevitable imperfections, and that lets them stagnate and grow. So the belief that you must be perfect in order to be good is an obstacle to being as good as you can be. So it would make our conversations with each other a lot smoother, and it would make us better at being good if we could recognize that we're not perfect and embrace that. So I want to offer a couple of things that you could keep in mind when you need to remind yourself that I'm not supposed to be perfect when it comes to navigating race. And the first thing is that anytime we're dealing with race issues, we are dealing with a social construct that was not born out of any science or reason or logic. We are grappling with a social construct that was not designed to make sense. And to the extent that it is the product of design, the race constructs that we live in America were shaped specifically by a desire to avoid making sense. They were shaped for centuries by a need to rationalize and justify indefensible acts. So when we grapple with race issues, we're grappling with something that was designed for centuries to make us circumvent our best instincts. It's a dance partner that's designed to trip us up. So just based on that alone, we should be able to keep in mind that you will never bat 1,000 when it comes to dealing with race issues. And the other thing that we need to keep in mind is, as we are all imperfect humans, and as has been laid out in some of the other talks this evening, we all have unconscious thought processes and psychosocial mechanisms that prop up. There are many things in our day-to-day lives that lead us towards developing little pockets of prejudice, that lead us towards acting unkind to others without having any intent to do so. These are things that will just naturally develop in our day-to-day lives. So the problem with that all or nothing binary is it causes us to look at racism and prejudice as if they are akin to having tonsils. Like you either have tonsils or you don't. And if you've had your prejudice removed, you never need to consider. So if someone says, I think you may have a little unconscious prejudice, you say, well, no, my prejudice was removed in 2005. I went to see that movie Crash. It's all good. But that's not how these things work. When you go through your day-to-day lives, there are all of these mass media and social stimuli, as well as processes that we all have inside our brains that we're not aware of, that cause us to build up little pockets of prejudice every day, just like plaque develops on our teeth. So we need to move away from the tonsils paradigm of race discourse towards the dental hygiene paradigm of race discourse. Just basically, that's if I could offer one piece of advice. And in general, I think we need to move away from the premise that being a good person is a fixed, immutable characteristic, and shift towards seeing being good as a practice. And it is a practice that we carry out by engaging with our imperfections. So we need to shift towards thinking of being a good person the same way we think of being a clean person. Being a clean person is something that you maintain and work on every day. We don't assume that I'm a clean person, therefore I don't need to brush my teeth. And when someone suggests to us that we've got something stuck in our teeth, we don't say, well, what do you mean? I have something stuck in my teeth, I'm a clean person. Why would you? So I know that this is no small task, but if we can shift a little bit closer towards viewing those race conversations the same way we view a conversation about something stuck in our teeth, it will go a long way towards making our conversations a bit smoother and allow us to work together on bigger issues around race, because there are a lot of, beyond the persistent conversational awkwardness of race, there are persistent systemic and institutional issues around race that are not caused by conversation, and they can't be entirely solved by conversation. You can't talk them away, but we need people to work together and coordinate and communicate to find strategies to work on those systemic issues, because despite all of the barriers that we've broken, all of the apparent markers of progress, there are still so many disparities if you look at unemployment rate, infant mortality rate, incarceration rates, median household income. There are so many disparities on the various sides of the color lines in this country that it is worthwhile for us to iron out these conversational issues, if for nothing else, so that we can get a little bit closer to working together on those big issues. So I hope that we can, if I could have one wish, it would be that we would reconsider how we conceptualize being a good person, and keep in mind that we are not good despite our imperfections. It is the connection we maintain with our imperfections that allows us to be good. Our connection with our personal and common imperfections, being mindful of those personal and common imperfections, is what allows us to be good to each other and be good to ourselves. So, I know that this is no easy task, and race may be the most difficult sphere in which to apply this concept, but I think it's where it could also reap the most rewards. So I hope that bit by bit, if we consider that and are mindful of it, we can shift away from taking it as an indictment of our goodness and move towards taking it as a gesture of respect and an act of kindness when someone tells us that we've got something racist stuck in our teeth.
I hope you guys found those videos educating and you learned something. I know that our internal DEI committee recommended both of these videos today to help educate council and the public about systemic racism. I'll come back to that in just a second. We'll go down to our DEI report. Just some updates on what we're working on. At our all staff meeting last week, we provided everybody with an update of what the city's doing regarding DEI. We also watched that King 5 systemic racism video as a group. And we're in the process of trying to identify some in-person training for sometime next year. If we can't do in person due to Corona, some sort of remote option virtually. The executive team, since we last talked, we finished the book study on white fragility. We're actually starting a new book study this week entitled I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness. It's by Austin Channing Brown. If you have any questions about that book or want more information on it, please reach out to me. Also, earlier this month, since we met, several staff members as well as a couple council members attended the AWC Real Advancing Racial Equity in Local Government 102 training. We just watched those videos tonight. As far as police review policy, we permanently amended the police department policy limiting lateral vascular neck restraints to deadly force situations. This is a very specific technique used to control the blood flow through the carotid artery. Some people refer to it as a chokehold, but it's actually an applied technique. We're working on a training plan for next year. The Equity Task Force, we had 3 staff members that applied, and I found out since I wrote this that they were all appointed to the School District Equity Task Force. And I believe Councilmember Peterson, you were selected as well, correct? See, I had none. So their first meeting is tomorrow night. The internal DEI committee, the charter was drafted and it's just awaiting final approval at the October meeting. Considerable amount of time was spent on the city employee value statements, and that'll also had some minor edits that'll be approved at the October meeting and then rolled out as part of our 2021 evaluation program. And I say 21, it's because we start the 21 evaluation program January 1st, and we do them on a year-long basis. So we'll be communicating that to all of our staff in November. Training, as I mentioned before, they attended the AWC training. They also have conducted a review. They actually reviewed over 20 training modules, and they narrowed it down to 6 relevant courses for ongoing staff training, as well as some additional training for onboarding. And we're still working with trying to identify businesses to feature on our website, primarily focusing on BIPOC, but that'll also be expanding a bit to cover other minority-owned businesses. Murals, you probably saw that the city-funded mural has been completed. That's along the liquor store there at Alder and Main. Excuse me, Alder and Maple.
Jason,
yes,
Jason, just a second. Charlotte had your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering if you can actually go through and explain, like, so internal DEI committee. I don't know that it's actually been explained about like who that is. For instance, and then how that applies in terms of conducting hire process review, but also like a charter drafted, and like, so a charter for who and who would implement that and whatnot.
Sure. This is our internal employee committee that focuses on diversity, equity, inclusion. This was a committee that was started back in July. It started from our strategic action recommendation team, which was a group of employees that got together and say, okay, how can we work on this issue? And they determined that let's have an internal DEI committee to look at several things throughout the city that affect staff. It doesn't mean that they won't recommend things to policy changes that would require council action, but it really is focused on our employees. The charter is something that really just, clearly defines what is diversity, what is equity, who's on the committee, how often they meet, and how we got to the committee members was it was most of the people that wanted to be on the START group also wanted to be on the DEI committee. We've added some other members on top of that, but it's about 15 people representing every single department in the city.
And I think working really hard. I just wanted to make sure that you didn't gloss over.
Sure.
And people understood really what a huge chunk of work is going into that. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Going down to the welcoming community, I already touched on the city mural that's been funded. The Arts Commission met last week to start developing their 2021 work plan, and we'll be bringing that back to council, making sure that it integrates council's desires and make sure that there's congruency between what council wants the Arts Commission working on and what they want to work on. Events, we actually met with the Sumner Main Street Association to discuss the city's goals of including more diversity to entertainment and food at Rhubarb Days. They were excited to do that. They actually have some new leadership, particularly on the events committee side of it, and we're already thinking that, so it was a good fit, and we're working, drafting our MOA with them to make sure that the city's goals are achieved next year. And then the Pride Bench, we did obtain some price estimates, and we'll be bringing a proposal to the Forestry and Parks Commission meeting October 8th for their review. And I'll go back to the picture I glossed over at the top. That's the bench that we were able to get quotes on, and that's what will be going to the commission for a recommendation about placement. This is the Forestry and Parks Commission, therefore, they oversee and they have kind of influence over parks itself. So not necessarily streetscapes. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions, comments, council members? Jason? Go ahead, Melanie.
Thanks for the summary, as always, and for the primer videos. What is our goal for council to have an in-person training? not in person together, but a person leading the training?
I don't know that I can answer that. I mean, this is something that council has asked for. So I think it's just to gain further awareness and understanding of how, as a policymaker, what your role is in spreading diversity, equity, inclusion, and making sure that the policies that you adopt are equitable and don't discriminate against a particular group. That would be my goal, but it's something that council would need to weigh in on as well.
So how do we achieve that goal if we're not going to have folks teaching us?
I think you should have somebody teach you.
Okay,
Yeah, but that would be my goal of what they would cover.
I see. So are we waiting for council to like approve a training budget, or what's the barrier to that next step?
So there's two primary barriers to that. Number one, there's money in next year's budget. There's not money in this year. So we've allocated in the preliminary budget, there's $10,000 a year for DEI training, and that covers both council and city staff. And then the second thing is just the world that we're in right now, being virtual. It's actually quite difficult to get this set up. I've been in contact with the city of Puyallup. They've been going through the same process and trying to find an in-person trainer that can deliver it effectively virtually. So hopefully we'll have some news soon on that.
Got it. Okay, thanks so much, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
And Melanie, I think you raised a really good point, in terms of how we move along. And I have to commend staff for, what they have done. Self-initiated, wasn't Jason pushing this thing. These are employees that have all come together and said, hey, we want to actively be involved to address this whole area. And I really have to commend, when you look at everything that he's listed down there, it's actually incredible. When it comes to council, I agree with Jason that we need to have training. The only way we can move forward is through training and knowledge. But again, it's a process, and we have to get to the point where we can make sense out of what that is, and so that we can bring it to the council, both something that is meaningful, helpful, and also something that we have that's in the budget. So keeping on trying to move it forward. I think for the size of our city and for the size of our staff and everything, is that they have done, again, incredible work compared to a lot of their jurisdictions around us, and hats off to staff and what they've done. But yeah, well, I am, and I think what they're trying to do, what Jason has tried to do in terms of the education so far has been like 3 videos getting that to council, because we're not teachers. I mean, and he's done what he can in that regard. And the next step is to find somebody that does have that expertise and can bring us along in the journey. So anyway, stay tuned. We'll get there. Other questions or comments, council members? Whoa, all of a sudden bigger people on the screen. Thanks, Jason. Questions? Go ahead, Charlotte.
No, I just again wanted to really say thank you for the review, for all of the categories and the thought that's been put into all aspects where this influences some of our, like how our city looks.
Agree. Other council members? Go ahead, Cindy.
Well, I actually appreciate the small chunks that we're receiving it in. I think that the videos have been very thought-provoking, and I think it's nice to be able to absorb it and give it some thought over time. And I think a full course from a person later on is probably very adequate, after the new year, because right now we're just absorbing new information. So appreciate the way it's going right now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Cindy. Anybody else? Well, I commend you all tonight because it's like, what is it, 8:15? You've been going at it for 2 hours and 15 minutes and a lot of material, none of which was really light material that you were going over. So, thank you for your patience in working through that. Hey, Jason. Sorry, I have to bring my agenda back up on my own screen. Okay, I guess through the regular business, then we move on to the city administrator report. Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, Mayor, just one thing tonight. Just want to remind everybody that might be watching this at home or in the future. Even though we are still battling a horrible virus during this pandemic, City Hall is still open and serving folks virtually. While our doors might be shut, we still have a limited number of staff that are in the building on a daily basis, as well as still working hard virtually for you. So, if you need anything, call or email.
The only thing you have to do in terms of the call and email, you have to get in between meetings because meetings have now gone to one after another, one from 8 to 9, then 9 to 10, and then 10 to 11. There's no break between them anymore because in a virtual environment, you don't have to go anywhere except from turn that screen off and go to the next one. So, actually the burden on staff has actually increased. The amount of meeting time and stuff has actually increased to a point where I'm not sure it's all that healthy, because you can be overburdened by continually meeting without having that downtime and away time to be able to process things and deal with other things. And so keep that in mind sometimes when you're dealing with staff. They have moved to a virtual environment and I think they're busier than ever. They can process through any of these systems, financial systems, permitting systems, anything else, and they're doing it virtually and doing it very, very well. So along with trying to deal with diversity, equity, inclusion issues and budget issues and everything else. So my hat's off to them, doing a great job. Okay, we go to agenda setting. Any calendar issues anybody has in terms of either council meetings or council committees? Nobody has any issues. Oh boy, I tell you. Okay, great. Glad that there's no calendar issues. We have no executive session. And if you said we did, I would say, no, we don't. Not at this point. And so that means it brings us to adjournment and we are adjourned. The time is 8:18. Be safe, everyone. Enjoy the week. The weather's going to be absolutely gorgeous. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.